Reflections. 2 Common Objections to the Christian Worldview. Excerpts from The Story of Reality by Gregory Koukl. I have been pondering the relationship between 2 objections to the Christian worldview, and I see they are all too common in our current time. Part 1 of this video will address the objection of Matter-ism. Before I address the first set objection, however, I want to start by mentioning one common question I hear coming from these 2 objections. That common question people ask is, who created God? I agree with the author when he says, I think it's an odd question. Children ask it frequently, but we expect it from them. Pretty much everything they encounter came from somewhere else, so it's natural for them to ask where God came from. Adults, I think, should realize this is not a proper question. I have never met anyone, believer or non-believer, who thought that if God existed, at least the kind of God we're talking about, he would be the kind of being that needed to be created. That's why it strikes me as strange when these same people ask, who created God? The question presumes that God was created, but no one believes that, certainly not Christians, so this is not a question any theist has to answer. An eternal, self-existent being has no beginning, so he needs no creator. This doesn't prove such a being exists, of course. It only shows that those who believe in God do not have to answer inappropriate questions about his origin. A related issue is this. What caused God? This is much like the first question, and it falters in a similar way since it is based on a similar misunderstanding. Common sense tells us that anything that happens is always a result of some other thing that made it happen. If we had reason to believe that God popped into the world like scientists think the universe did, then what caused God would be a proper question. However, that is not what the story, with a capital S, teaches. God did not happen in that sense. He did not come from anything since he never came to be in the first place. Because the story teaches God had no beginning, unlike the universe, but always was, there is no need to answer questions like this one either. That's why I say this question is based on a misunderstanding. Again, this doesn't prove the story is right about God not having a beginning, but it does show that the question about his origin doesn't apply to a story like this one. It might be a good question to ask, though, of gods in other stories. The second issue is a concern about miracles. I know that opening line of the story, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, seems unbelievable to some, but there's good reason to believe something like this actually happened. Let me give you the best reason I can think of to believe that the first words of our story describe what really took place long, long ago before anyone was around to see it. Consider this. Virtually no one who has thought about the issue at all, especially people like astrophysicists who spend their lives studying such things, believes the universe has always existed. Scientists pretty much agree that everything in the universe had a beginning. All physical things exploded into existence in a fraction of an instant long ago in what people call the Big Bang. The term started out as kind of a joke, but it stuck because it fits so well. I know the Big Bang idea is controversial with some Christians, but I think that's because they haven't realized how well it fits the story, which basically says the same thing. It doesn't say that everything came from nothing, which would be very hard to believe, I think, harder even than believing in God. That's because common experience, not to mention common sense, teaches that anything that happens is always a result of some other thing that made it happen, and nothing at all makes nothing at all happen. By contrast, what the story says makes perfect sense. It says that everything came from someone. What I'm going to say next may be an odd way of putting it, but it gets right to the point. A big bang needs a big banger. To most people that seems correct that moment, they let it sink in. Once you realize how amazingly obvious that statement is, the idea that the something that caused the universe was actually someone becomes much more plausible. And it is a short logical step from there to the conclusion that this one, who would have existed before the time-space physical world he created, is not bound up inside it or subject to it. If God made everything out of nothing, unlike some other stories where gods made things from stuff that was already there, that means he's pretty powerful and pretty smart. What are the chances then, do you think, that he can change water into wine, if he wanted to, or make a blind man see, or cause the sun to stand still for a day, as odd as that may sound? A simple principle is at work here. A person who's won an Olympic weightlifting medal probably could manage carrying your boxes if you asked him. You see the point. If God created the entire universe in an instant, and we now know that could well be what happened, then just about anything else out of the ordinary would be pretty easy by comparison. That's why in this story you will find things happening that wouldn't make any sense at all in a world of a different sort. Instant healings, massive bodies of water parting on command, loaves and fishes miraculously multiplied, even people coming back from the dead, yet they fit quite properly into our story. Here the system is subject to its master. The maker controls the matter, not the other way around. So, on the Christian view, God and the world mind and matter are two different kinds of things. Both are real. The first, God, is maker and sovereign over the second, everything else. It's important to be clear on this in light of two competing stories you will encounter. According to the first alternative, matter is all that exists. The only things that are real are physical things in motion, governed by natural law. Though this view sounds very modern and up to date, it is actually quite old, going back thousands of years to the first people who began to wonder about such things. The everything is matter story starts, "In the beginning were the particles." One famous person described it this way:
"The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be."
This is where the story starts, and this is where the story ends, because there is nothing more. No God, no souls, no heaven or hell, no miracles, no transcendent morality, just molecules in motion following the patterns of natural law. You might want to call this view Matter-ism, though most people call it materialism. It's also called physicalism or naturalism because it involves physical stuff being pushed and pulled around by natural laws. These three words are not exactly synonyms, but using them that way is close enough for our discussion. Of course, the Matter-ism story is nothing like our story. This is a competing story of reality. It does have some of the same puzzle pieces as ours, but leave out so many other pieces that the final picture is radically different. This is the story that most atheists, most skeptics, most humanists, and most Marxists believe is true. It's also the story that many non-atheists act like is true, even when they say they believe something else. Many people think Matter-ism is a reasonable thing to believe. That's because so much of what we are aware of is physical. Everything we can see, everything we can touch, everything we can hear or taste or smell. It's one of our first and most powerful impressions of the way things are. But isn't something missing? When I said there is nothing more than matter in this story, and this is where the story ends, I didn't mean there were no other details that were important to those who believe this account of reality. I meant that it's difficult to see how anything deeply meaningful can result. If at the end of the day, the world is nothing but mindless matter in motion, then where does that leave us? Some thinkers committed to this view have been quite candid on this point. One put it this way: "It is already evident that all the objective phenomena of the history of life can be explained by purely naturalistic or materialistic factors. Therefore, mankind is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind." This next one is a bit more colorful, coming from one of Matter-ism's more colorful advocates, Richard Dawkins. Yet it makes my point exactly. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, and other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes summed up this view famously, if indelicately, when he said that life in an unregulated state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Nature red in tooth and claw, that sort of thing. Or as Dennis Prager put it, nature has only one commandment, not 10, eat or be eaten. And they are right, it seems, if Matter-ism is true. Many who hold this view, however, most, I dare say, have felt the full force of it. Here is one of the difficulties with Matter-ism. We all know that something has gone terribly wrong with the world. We call it the problem of evil. But that can only be so if there is a right way for things to be. And that could only be so if the world was designed for a purpose that for some reason is not being achieved. But it's hard to make sense of purpose and things gone wrong if we are driven solely by a purposeless and natural process that did not have us in mind. if there is no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good? And if life in the final analysis is nothing more than solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short?
Our life in 10 years from now will be completely different, very much affected, and who masters those technologies in some way will be the master of the world.
Hey, how are you? Great. I am in a great mood. Create, explore, expand, conquer. I have a question. Will you be my tutor? I would appreciate that. I definitely will. You are very welcome. I will always be here for you. I will always be here for you. I will always be here for you.
To be clear, in Matter-ism there is no mind, no cosmic force, no plan, no purpose. I emphasize purpose here since I am referring to an ultimate purpose, a majestic purpose, a purpose beyond and above our mere personal projections. Of course, anyone can come up with his or her own private individual purpose that may be grand for them, but still, it could never rise to anything greater than self-interest, however noble their personal purpose may sound, since there is nothing greater than self-interest because in Matter-ism, no ultimate purpose exists. Remember, too, that when people get to make their own purposes, the door is open to limitless variety with no individual purpose better than any other. There should be no way to say, for example, that Megan the social worker could have a purpose that was any better than Robert the stockbroker, or even, as ghastly as it sounds, Drake, the sex slave trader, since that would require a purpose that served as a kind of benchmark the others could be measured by. But in Matter-ism, that benchmark does not exist. We should not be surprised then when those who take this view seriously, if they were brutally honest, are eventually overcome with a gnawing sense of futility. For to take this view to its logical and proper conclusion, in the final analysis, life is ultimately empty, meaningless, purposeless, cold, and void. Philosophers call this nihilism, which means nothingism. And when someone starts really believing nothingism about themselves and other human beings, bad things begin to happen. These are some of the reasons I do not think Matter-ism, taken as a whole, is an adequate picture of reality.